So in the previous episode, we talked extensively about research, conducting market research, technology research, user research, and competitive research. And now moving from research, where do we start? Where do we start building and what do we do of the data and the information that we have collected during the research?
You should always start thinking about building a bicycle before you start a bus.
When you have a lot of data and when you're about to start building, the first thing is that you start with the epicenter. How would I start is usually my most preferred option. It actually boils down to taking all of that data and then plugging it into a design sprint. In a normal setting, it would take at least 3 to 4 to 6 months to come to a tangible representation of literally converting research into a product. If I want to get excited about this space, and I partially am, if I look at 2 years down the lane and if I set an objective for myself, will I be able to chase it with a bunch of other group or people who are going to build this product with me and continue on this journey? So that is where it starts.
So in the previous episode, we talked extensively about research, conducting market research, technology research, user research, and competitive research. And now moving from research, where do we start? Where do we start building and what do we do of the data and the information that we have collected during the research? Starting with you, Neil, where do we start?
So I did start with the research of the competitors' platforms. Just to source information about what kind of features are the features that people like or customers like, and what is it that they hate, right? And what I got from those data was that in terms of features, pretty much everything was available in that sense for email signatures. Only thing that I was seeing or the underlying or the in between part of it was that people had to set their headshots in the email signature. No platform was providing that at that point in time. I thought that these are so there are two basic platforms. One is for profile picture and the second one is for email signatures. So I just thought that if we collect both of them together, if we combine both of them together in a single platform, it would be of great help for people to come up with the branded email signatures, which is something that was kind of missing in the current platforms that I was looking at. So I decided there, this is something that I want to build. So I think the core idea here is to come up with something which you feel is the value proposition for your own product. So that is where we start thinking about, right? So this is one of the thing, and again, I may have told this time and time again, but I would continue repeating because that's where the juice is. I feel that you should always start thinking about building a bicycle before you start a bus. So for me, bicycle was the email signature part of it. So I started there, and the thought process was to see where the gaps are, or if there are no gaps, then try to understand what could be one thing that people might be excited about, which is probably not available right there in the market, or they may have to. It could be for convenience. In my case, two platforms are already available, but combined together both the features into single platform and getting an email signature out of it was something that I felt was a great value creator, and that's what my assumption was, and that's what my hypothesis was. So that's where I kind of started thinking in terms of product.
Interesting. That's super interesting. That just to summarize what you have shared is you conducted once you conducted your extensive research. You started looking onto your competitors' platform and what they are providing in terms of features,
Right.
and you identified certain gaps which became opportunities for you.
Yes.
And you kind of brought different features together and provided a unique value through your product.
Absolutely.
And that's what you validated through your product.
Yes.
You shared a very unique perspective about how did you go start about building your product. Over to you, Harshil. While Neil very beautifully brought together of how did he go about starting a product, I'd like to know your perspective from a service lens point of how do you go about building something once you have conducted a research or gathered requirements from your clients.
We also were talking about rework, and one of the juiciest thing from rework was to start at the epicenter, and I think that when you have a lot of data and when you're about to start building, the first thing is that you start with the epicenter is what I picked up from. And it was just in this instance that I realized, okay, how about you start from the differentiator itself. So that was something that I picked up. And now about how would I start is usually my most preferred option is, I know that you guys know it, but and anyone who knows me closely knows it, that for me it actually boils down to taking all of that data and then plugging it into a design sprint, which I'm really comfortable with, and I enjoy doing design sprints. So just for context, design sprints, you guys know, but people who are listening to this, design sprints, it's a very fast-paced, structured 5-day workshop where you go from idea to a tangible representation of that idea, which is tested with users at the end of the day. So like 5 days, you are action packed. You're going in that scenario where you're testing, you're going from idea to data and testing in that sense where you have conducted your user research. Like that's where the loop ends for me. And I would take everything that I've collected, plug it into a design sprint, and for me it starts there. Like it starts from day one of the design sprints where you kind of start with a goal that, okay, if this is the space that we're excited about, 2 years, if we keep continuing on this journey, in a very hypothetical situation, what would we would have achieved in general? That is where it starts. Like the first thing is kind of what you talked starts at a differentiator. What I talked is how do we want to feel about if we are in that space, is something that you also talk about more often. It's that market founder fit is something like that do we see ourselves doing this for the next 2 years? If we do that, if you imagine that scenario, that what does it look like 2 years down the lane, it's a very good optimistic scenario. And then you talk risks. It's very hard to pronounce, risks. So and then you identify, okay, what could potentially stop you from reaching that point. 2 years down the lane, what could potentially stop you? And you have that's the only thing. And this is like, it also fits into the OKR framework. Like it's just you writing your objective. Like if I want to get excited about this space, and I partially am, if I look at 2 years down the lane and if I set an objective for myself, will I be able to chase it with a bunch of other group or people who are going to build this product with me and continue on this journey? So that is where it starts. With a differentiator, in your case, in a design sprint kind of a setup, you have all that research. For me, it starts at defining what it is going to look like 2 years down the lane. Is it sexy enough for me who's going to work on this product? Can I keep on doing this for 2 years? That is where it starts.
So I love the part where you mentioned about design sprints. Why, I will tell you. The context I gave in the earlier response was that was based on the career I already had, which is like 7 years of journey into different part of the overall ecosystem or the overall domain. The whole journey that I had already, that made me the person who I am today, so that I can be that person who can decide on the differentiator part of it.
Yeah.
But for the most of the people, I feel like that's not the case. And that's where I think design sprints comes really handy.
Yeah.
That's where consulting from people like you or the people or the team that you have with that comes into picture. That says that, you know what, if somebody comes up and say that, I want to build a mobile application, and you end up convincing, or you end up providing that data that, mobile app is not you should be chasing. You should be making web application first. So that education part of it is sort of missing for the for most of the people.
A lot of people, yes.
Lot of people. So
Yeah.
that's where I think design sprints come into picture.
Yeah.
And I would also say that and we discussed earlier as well, that I being a part of design sprint earlier in my career, I sort of extracted some part of it and used it in coming up with differentiator for sync signature.
Yeah.
So of course, so lightning demos is one of the juiciest thing that I felt I should be using for coming up with the solution.
But I like the way you you elaborated on two different things, and that is what we talked during our earlier episode as well, while we were talking research, that you have two ways about doing or conducting research. One is more structured, other is more unstructured, and you were one of those people who had a very unstructured format to conducting research, and I guess it kind of then continues for you as well, that you were following an unstructured format, but there was a structure that was built in your mind, in your gut, for 7 years or 8 years of you being in the tech space, in the ecosystem. And that's how you could recognize that, okay, this might be a potential differentiator. But a lot of us maybe don't start at that point. And to be very honest, I like design sprints is just because of that very thing. In a normal setting, it would take at least 3 to 4 to 6 months to come to a tangible representation of, literally converting research into a product. But if you plug that into a design sprint, the first victory is internal victory. It is for you, because now you've seen your research getting converted into a prototype. Right. That doesn't happen for a lot of designers, especially in the service space. We don't get access to that data, that what actually happened to our designs, because in a service setup, what usually happens is that, as you said, clients come with a very specific set of requirements, and they know in their heads what they want. And we always are people who come and make their ideas more tangible, more representative, so that can be built and then users access it. But we never get that first-hand validation that what happened to our designs. And that is a very long cycle for any designer who's listening to this. And I guess they might be feeling this, but the sense of joy for us, design sprints, is very hard for us to convince people to do it. And I'm fortunate enough to be a part of so many sprints. If you want your research to be converted into a more tangible format, and you want to see whether that was the right set of data you collected, plug it into a design sprint. If you don't have a lot of experience and you're not someone who can come with that mindset that, okay, this is my differentiator, because that happened to you, and that happened to you, as you really said well, that it happened because you are in the space since so long, and it's for easy, maybe now very intuitive for you to identify that that's a differentiator. So the second format is that you just do lightning demos and you will get to that. So that's the starting point for me. If that gives a complete answer, that where do you start, I guess it starts with the day one of design sprint.
One of the things I remember is that when, even before building sync signature, when we went into design sprint mode, which was more of a alignment sprint, but I clearly remember that it turned out in such a way that it gave us a really clear guidelines as to what to look forward. In a way that all of us were aligned on that thing. Like three of us would think about doing something. We just have to run through that process, and we would know whether it's yes or no. It's just like that. And I remember that not continuing with one of the product was one of the decisions made because of that process, and I really appreciate that. And of course,
from what you were talking about, like the product we were doing alignment workshop for, that was the core idea, wasn't it? Like, do we continue or not? And that data never happens. And that was, I was trying to say, that design sprints kind of allows you to make that decision very early, that whether to keep continuing in that direction or not. While we were saying that, like, the first thing is that to come up with a long-term goal, a 2-year goal. So you say that, okay, 2 years down the lane, this is how it is going to look like. In 5 days, you get a very fast paced trailer of how 2 years are going to look like.
Right.
That is what happened to us
Exactly.
in
Right.
those 2 days.
If there is any project that comes into your mind
Yeah.
where you went through the design sprint
Hmm.
and you started with something or the data points, and then you came up with a small or like actual thing that
Yeah. And yes, we actually sprinted for a B2C application, and there were two. Recently we facilitated two design sprints. One was, of course, a web application in the whole creative space. So it was something for people in the creative domain, businesses in the creative domain. And it was a very vague concept. Like, it was just an thought that whether something like this is possible or not. We plugged it into a design sprint. Of course, we have our own formats of conducting some pre-flight research before we go into the design sprint. So we did that. We created a visual representation of what that web application could look like. We actually tested it with people as well. And we had some early adopters, some good feedback from those people that they would be willing to use it. But again, it might be unsexy to the stakeholders at that point because it required a lot of work. And there was something that, it again is B2C space, something, I wouldn't say what was the space, but I would say that there is some sort of stigma associated with that space. So what we did sprint for, it might end up being built, because the feedback, even though it is associated with stigma, the feedback was really positive. And again, this happened in 5 days, from validating and conducting a lot of upfront research to then creating a tangible representation in 5 to 6 days, and then now waiting for that to be executed. And that for us is a victory.
Right.
A lot of other products we might have designed, but we don't know what happened to it.
Right.
So yeah.
Just to add a little bit more context, in the sprint I did with you guys,
Yeah.
Like we did together with your team, was me, Nachiket and Vipul. Like,
Yes.
three of us have at least spent a decade
Yeah.
in a space.
Yeah.
So the context here is, these are not like we
New ones.
Yeah, exactly. These are the people who have spent a lot of time
Yeah.
in tech space.
Yeah.
Still, we went through the process, and most of the things were known, right? But it, as the workshop said,
Alignment. Yeah.
It gave us a lot of clarity.
Yes.
It gave us a lot of clarity in terms of values that we share, in terms of things that we want to build, in terms of how we are looking at this venture as a business. All of that comes very handy with it. And without speaking with each other, we were able to kind of come up on a same page. That's what the beauty was. Like that's what I really admire about design sprint. Yeah.
We have to have an episode where we only talk design sprint.
Oh, yeah.
And that is what design sprint start.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So you guys have been rambling since a long time.
Yeah.
Amazing story.
By design sprint.
Okay. So we've got into a lot of extensive discussions on when do you start, or where do you go about starting to build, having two different perspectives about going and looking at your competitors' platforms, plugging design sprints into it. You have shared experience around in the past doing sprints together, and how that has collectively helped you and your team align whether you want to move forward or not. So Neil, you have been building Sync Signature for almost 8 to 9 months now. And learning from you, I really want to know on how did you scope what are you going to build first?
Right.
How did you decide that this is the first piece of code that's going to be written, or this is the first screen that's going to be built, or this is the first flow that's going to be designed?
So my background has been into building. The main concern I had was to where to stop and not to start. Like, it's reverse for me, because when you're coming from that background, you have the leverage of working with developers. You are in the tech industry, you would always extend yourself to, let's build this as well, or let's add this one thing, and that will complete my whole project, or whole MVP, as we say, right? So I always felt that this is the wrong way of doing things, and I always made sure that whatever I want to do, I want to think about what not to do and where to put a full stop. So in this journey as well, I felt the same way. Like if I was looking at platforms which are email signature specific, they were providing a lot of features, like there will be analytics, there will be deployment of signatures, and these are essential things as well. And we as a venture owners, we sort of decided to go out with a B2B solution. But the thing was, the background I had made me realize that this is a place where you may want to validate first in a way that uh, it is working well for all the people. So of course people know what email signatures are. Of course they are using it in a lot of ways. Not all. That is one of the realization, that not all of people were knowing what email signatures were when I was trying to talk with people. So in my mind it's like 20 years old concept. How do people not know, right? But then I also realized that that is also something that people did not know, some of them at least. Okay, I'll tell you one of the insights. One of the insights I had was to be restrictive in the scope, in form of time. So for example, if I start today, I would want to finish building part of it in 1.5 months, no matter what. Anything else that doesn't fit here would be overlapped or would go out of it. And trust me when I say this, 7 years of my experience says that even if you decide to do just 4 things, and all the estimations or everything are for 4 weeks or 3 weeks, it will get extended. It's not a bug, it's a feature of engineering teams. Like they would always try to make it perfect, or whatever, in some form or the other it will get extended. So that's what my experience has been so far. So I always thought that I don't want to continue that route. I just want to make sure that something happens within 1.5 months. And for that, whatever I had to do, I did that. And the first step I took was I uh, sort of divided the timeline into 2 things. One is design, second is development. I divided those two parts, and I whatever I took from those two aspects, like profile pictures and email signatures, I roughly draw, because of my background. I had this opportunity, sorry, not opportunity, but I had this leverage to put something out there in a nice wireframes form. I did that exactly, and I show it to Harshil probably, and then we said that this is the base, or the epicenter that I want to build. You know what? After that, some of those things, smaller things, for example, login, forgot password, this, that, are not very essential for me. Whatever is already there, you put it, and just focus on this one epicenter, and everything else should fall into place within that. And you have 1 week of time for design and 1.5 weeks of development. That's it, nothing else. So that's how I sort of divided those things. And I would say that one of the core learning was you should know where to stop. That is for sure.
I was listening to your podcast, third episode, which is around MVP, and amazing podcast. So where you both were discussing about not minimum viable product, but something called minimum valuable experience.
Exactly.
So would you like to elaborate more on that, on how did you decide what is the minimum valuable experience for your users and the product and your business at the
Right.
same time?
So minimum valuable experience was, for us, it was profile pictures and email signature putting together and coming up with a branded email signature just from your company logo. That was the minimum valuable experience. So when we were discussing, I remember I specifically told this bit that you know what, it's okay if forgot password will not work, but what we need to make sure is, or what I don't want to, what are my non-negotiable is, one thing is like you can be able to get the primary color from the logo and then get that primary color and put it in the background of the people's headshot and then coming up with the email signature. Because a lot of times the research, I did not get any direct feedback from the customer that they were not able to come up with a branded signature, but I could read in between the lines, and I could see that there is a small inconvenience that happens when you try to use a template and then you change something, tweak something into that, and then it becomes or looks like disaster. So that's what my assumption was, and I wanted to validate through this thing. We just went with that in the market and we received a good response. So I am guessing that it was a successful experiment in that sense. So that was the minimum valuable experience for us.
Amazing. So it's very interesting to just know of how did you identify and read between the lines of just simply creating a branded email signature using the company logo.
Right.
And that was the core experience or the core task, user task for your
Exactly.
product.
Yeah.
And that was the minimum valuable experience. So it's really the concept in general, minimum valuable experience, guys. That was something for the first time I heard at the on your episode, and now listening from you of how did you convert that theory
Right.
into implementation is super interesting. So for anyone who's also listening to this episode and to your experiences, I'm sure they're going to take tons of lessons and going to implement. I'm for sure going to do that in my next project that I'm going to be working on. Over to you, Harshil. We heard what Neil had to share on how did he scope out his first feature or the first scope of his product and his first minimum valuable experience. How do you go about deciding and restricting the scope on what are you going to build first? How do you decide minimum valuable experience for the products that you design for, or how could you plug in that into a design sprint? Could you share your experience if you have any from the past?
What we usually refer to is, in our group at least, as designers, we always refer to this as minimum lovable product. Mostly for us, as in practice from a service side of things, it's trying to understand what people are actually wanting. Because most of the time when we try to look at existing solutions, for us minimum valuable experience start at looking at existing solutions. There is nothing new under the sun. And as Neil said, what he's already done is that he'd look at existing solutions. We also kind of look at existing solutions. We go try to steal from industries, businesses who might have solved a similar problem in different contexts, of course, and we try to map a user journey. And that is also a part of the sprint. The first thing that we do after just identifying what is the objective, we try to map the user flow, or we would say user experience map. How are your users currently discovering? So for example, sync signature, how people discover sync signature, where they can learn more about it, how do they go and learn more about what sync signature is, and how do they start using sync signature, and what is the end goal. And if you do it for any product, what you would identify is the pain points in that space. So imagine that sync signature doesn't exist and you want to map a flow to be able to come up with what sync signature would do differently if you started at the differentiator. So what you would map is their existing workflow. How are they accomplishing the task of creating an email signature with a branded headshot currently? And what potentially Neil experienced through a lot of different platforms was exactly that. I start with mapping the existing flow, and that is my real life first experience of what it does feel like to bloody come up with an email signature. Or the second scenario is Neil comes up with sync signature and says that that's fundamentally wrong. From the user recordings that I'm looking at from analytics, I don't think that the amount of people coming to this platform and the amount of signatures created, there's a huge gap, there's a misbalance. And we would again go into the same setup and now again map the whole journey. And that's when again, as a designer, you experience the whole bloody thing for the first time. And that's when you identify that, okay, what is the core, what is the epicenter, what is the half of everything that a product is required or is supposed to do for the user. And that's, I guess, is minimum valuable experience for us.
Yeah, it absolutely does. While it makes sense, while Neil shared on how did he go about building a product from a product owner's or founder's perspective, you shared on how someone like Neil comes with his requirements to you or for building and designing that product, and how do you start building that
Yeah.
as a designer.
Yes.
So what you've shared is you start mapping the once you've got the requirement from your client, in this case Neil, you start going about looking at current user flow, how the user is doing, maybe using multiple platforms, maybe using some frugal ways of doing it manually, a lot of manual tasks, and you identify certain gaps onto the current user flow, and that's where your minimum lovable experience or minimum valuable experience goes about being
shaping up. Yeah.
Exactly, shipping up it from a designer's lens.
Yeah.
Okay, while you may go about building, I am sure I myself went through those challenges. I'd like to know from you, Harshal, first, what kind of challenges and blockers do you face when you go about building your first experience, designing the first experience? Maybe those challenges are internal or client challenges or user challenges.
Okay, that's an interesting question, to be very honest. And we have faced these situations, and to be able to, give a very concrete answer as much as possible, because we tend to ramble and go on different tangents. While every time Janki comes up with a question which is interesting, is that there are situations that, like, where we as designers, where we come in the entire process, our intersection is it's like during when an idea is getting shaped. So someone has already thought of something, someone has a visual representation in their mind, an idea has started growing in their mind, and that's when they try to communicate that idea to a designer, that this is something that I'm thinking and we would want a visual representation of this. And we ourselves have faced that situation very recently, what we were working on. So what happens is that once you start going about what designers would do, they'll try to look at 4 to 5 different products, look at what currently is there, try to create user flows, and then start creating a visual representation of someone else's idea. That's the intersection. You're now trying to give form and shape to what was just a thought. And what happens is that once you present it for the first time, that's when challenges starts. But the biggest challenges are that once a design is represented or it's given a proper form, that's when you start throwing a lot of stakeholders from a different, like, a marketing lens would say that, let's try to collect feedback after the journey is completed, or let's throw in a very fancy motion where it says that thank you for ordering with, or thank you for ordering from Swiggy or Zomato, rate the order now, because that's the growth side of things. Then there would be another stakeholder who would say that the color of this thing is not nice, let's add different colors. And everything that is added is a challenge. Everything that, where you said that it's not about where to start, it's where to stop. Those are the challenges that we face. Once the design phase starts, once there's a tangible representation, there is no way in a service side of things that you can stop stakeholders from adding things to what you've already designed. The opportunity lies when you're doing it in a design sprint setup, because you have already prototyped something and you get it in front of the users as fast as possible, and something that the users have interacted with. There's a saying, right? Customer wins. That is what you can use. That, okay, this is what people like, they're loving it, they're loving the way the prototype works, they're loving the way it's designed, why not just build it? So that's when you can cut off a lot of restrictions, and you have to give some form of user validated data to it. If there is some, even if you can test it with 2 to 3 users, and if you can put in that data that we have tested with 3 to 4 people and they like it, and the time to task is significantly lesser, we don't need to add anything, that is a killer solution to avoiding the roadblocks that the design team or designers would encounter.
So the kind of challenges that you're addressing is the subjective feedback, multiple subjective feedback from the stakeholders involved throughout the building phase,
Yeah.
Which could potentially impact the launch and the execution of the project. But if I connect to, this is a very idealistic scenario where you have clients like Neil, where they already have a time constraint,
Yeah.
work with time constraints in their head, that they probably are very clear of where to start, but the biggest challenge is to know where to stop.
Yes.
Just like what you've shared.
Yes.
So moving from that part, Neil, what are the kind of challenges now that we know that when you outsource your designs or your building, your development to someone else, what are the kind of challenges that the team faces? I'd like to hear from you on what are the kind of challenges you as a product owner or a founder face when you step into the execution, the building phase of the life cycle.
That's a really great question, and thank you for considering me as a good client. I don't know, I really fit into that place, but yeah, I mean, one of the biggest challenge I see as a founder in this building journey is, the temptation of, yeah, wanting more and, getting that one feature squeeze in the timeline so that, but it always ends up creating more problems. This is something that one should avoid. Like, if you have decided that restricted time for your product, you would stick to that no matter what. And something is, even if you are able to do it earlier than that, better. You don't want to squeeze in one more thing into that solution, or it will not help you in the long run for sure. When you are putting something out there, you don't have to be perfect in all sense. One of the most craziest example I give is, right now my payment processor is sort of broken. So anybody who wants to pay for the product would have to pay, and they would not have access to the features right away. But since somebody, I shouldn't say it on the camera, but I'm still saying, just to give some more insights, that when you pay for something, you would probably want to know that why it is not working. So if somebody pays to me, they will probably see that it's not reflecting. They'll send me an email or call me that why is it not happening. Then I can politely say that the processor is failed, you have to do it manually, and that's how we are running right now. So that broken of a system we have right now, which is not ideal and which is very short in the time. Like, as soon as we fix it, it will be fixed forever. But something like this, when it shouldn't be there, first of all, that is for sure. But just saying, like, while all of these things are happening, and your QA team or the tester would still go after that small thing, like forgot password is not working or something of that sort, and for that they want to stop the launch or delay the launch. You have to, being in the service industry but also understanding the product mindset, you have to be mindful of those things. And while the QA is being done, you have to prioritize those things as well, because of course testers work is to test things, and they would come up with most elaborated edge cases and all of that. But do you want to solve for all of them? Probably not, right? So I would say that have a backlog of those things and try to deprioritize some of that which is not required in your first version. That will save you time as well. That is what I felt was, from the service industry, service lens, it makes sense because they want to deliver 90% good product. But trust me, 75% is fine for the first version. So that's what I feel, and I believe that you should prioritize those things in a way that it makes sense.
That makes sense. What you've shared kind of just adds on to what Harshil has shared about the challenges, wherein people who are into product building or going about materializing their ideas where you are at this point, you always want to add in that one last bit, one last feature,
Right.
and you want to squeeze in that thing before you release. But how do you overcome that? You've very rightly mentioned on time constraining it, still
Right.
adhering to the timelines that you have set and sticking by it. That I think requires a lot of self awareness as a founder yourself, and having that sort of constraints on yourself, that let me release this and then put it into a bucket where I can work on those features and on a later release. Second challenge that you shared was, again connecting to what you've shared first, is trying to perfect the release, trying to fix those final bits, which could, I would believe, could the product could work without them.
Right.
And wherein from your perspective you'd always want to just fix it until the last moment, trying to perfect it and release it. So yeah, both of the perspectives kind of make sense. I think we've covered most of the part for what goes into building after research, or what do you do with those insights and hell lot of data that you've collected in the research phase. I definitely have a lot of notes to take from both of you. I'll leave it on to you, Harshil, to summarize all that we have spoke, all the juice that you and Neil have shared on this episode today.
I mean, it is, I guess you've done a good job summarizing everything that we've spoken in the bits, but just to give a high level overview, since I was mostly wondering and it's a new setup, so it gives, there were a lot of instances where you would see us uncomfortable. That is one of the most important summaries as well, that we were a bit uncomfortable today, but eventually it's experimentative in nature. So, again, to summarize, getting back to getting back on track, since we've rambled for a long time. Once you have researched, now we're talking about how do you go about building. There are two lenses, one from Neil's perspective, where you are already in the space and you have been through a lot of cycles in the ecosystem of researching building, and now it's, you're driven by a gut to be able to identify what the differentiator or what the epicenter is. So you just identify that. You look at different platforms, you look at your competitors in the space, and you identify what is it that is your minimum valuable experience for the users. From someone who's comparatively new to the space, and you just don't have that extensive experience of going through the loops of research and build and research and build. You'd want to plug all your research into a design sprint, because that is my take and that is my experience as well. Because the idea is to go from research to its tangible representation in as short a time frame as possible, because designers don't get data very easily, that what actually happened to their products and what happened to the research. So try to get to a tangible representation as fast as possible. We also talked about prioritization. How do you make sure that you are only focused on the minimum valuable experience, and what do you have to do to be able to make sure that you don't end up throwing a lot. And what you shared, Neil, was amazing. It's knowing where to stop and not where to start. So once you start building, you have to also understand where to stop building. And one of the ways that you do that is putting some constraints. And especially still like an artist, again, to quote that book, it's that creativity comes out to be really, I guess, one of the core essentials of being creative is putting yourself in some constraints, because boundless or timeless or infiniteness to creation is the most damaging side to being creative. So quoting that, you have to make sure that you're operating in constraints. And we talked about certain challenges that you could face. It's really important for designers to throw in some user validation, to make sure that you try to focus on the core task and you try to side on towards the engineering team and try to bring those constraints in, that as much as you would want to add things to it, it will only delay the time to launch. And the most important thing is that don't try to perfect things. A 7 on 10 is still good, is really better than half as 7 on 10. A half 7 on 10 is really something that you should be going after. I hope that summarizes everything. Anything that you guys think that can be added?
You've covered it well.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, folks. I guess that was everything from us. I hope you're not sleeping. If you're sleeping, you can get up and yeah, have a good one. Thank you for listening to us.